Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Today on CityCast Boise, big things are brewing at the state capitol this week, from proposed bills that would give Idaho more control over immigration enforcement to new roadblocks for citizen ballot initiatives. There's a lot at stake. And because the legislature is always serving absurdity, we're playing our version of Date, Marry, Kill with some of the most ridiculous proposals. It's Monday, February 3rd. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. This is an episode that has been in the works for several months now, and I am so excited about it. Joining me today is James Dawson, Boise State Public Radio's political reporter. Jimmy, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I'm super excited too.
So kind of a conundrum that we had last legislative session was trying to cover our Friday news show and what was happening in the legislature. And in Idaho, a lot of the news becomes about the legislature, but there's other important news topics too. So we thought about, what about this session? We separate them a little bit. So we'll have Friday news show like we always do. But then on Mondays, we will have a look at the legislature so everyone can know what's happening. So Jimmy, you are the perfect person to be able to have this conversation with. And what kind of is the feel right now at the Capitol? What's, we're still early in the session. What's the vibe?
Yeah, I would say the vibe is people are still kind of feeling each other out. Apparently, I've heard from a couple people off the record that leadership, even as of like a week ago, like pretty fresh in the session, are already tired, which doesn't really bode well for February and March. Just because, that's when far more things are happening all at once. And it's, I don't know, seemingly not a super enthusiastic session already.
Yeah, it's a little early to be tired of antics. It's, we're early. We got to still be a little fresh, a little on top of things.
Yeah, you got to get your caffeine in there if you choose to consume it, and really pace yourself to get to the finish line.
Well, one of the topics that we just absolutely have to talk about, it's how we're looking at immigration. And President Trump's administration has really set a tone regarding immigration. But the Idaho legislature is, in a lot of ways, trying to keep pace or taking their cues from that administration. Because there's been a couple of immigration-related bills that have been proposed. Can you break down what those bills are and, who's proposed them? What is the impetus behind these bills?
Yeah, of course. So, like you said, two different bills, one in the House, one in the Senate. I guess we'll start off in the House. This is kind of a bill that was proposed last year as well by Representative Jaron Crane. He's a Nampa Republican. And this one is, I would say, the harsher of the two. So under his bill, you have a magistrate judge could issue a deportation order if this undocumented person is picked up on another crime. The big thing to keep in mind while you're thinking about these two issues is that immigration is federally enforced. So the states currently, they can cooperate, they can help out the feds and ICE, but they themselves aren't the ones in charge of issuing these deportation orders, which is why this is kind of a landmark issue. And this is modeled off of a Texas bill, Texas law that is currently not in effect because it's being held up in the courts. The appeals court down there that covers Texas is still trying to decide whether or not it's constitutional, whether or not it'll go to the Supreme Court. We don't know. Then you have the Senate version from the Senate Pro Tem Kelly Anthony, basically defining what a, quote, dangerous illegal alien is. And that basically means that a person has past convictions. Think about different convictions for aggravated assault, sex crimes, kidnapping, robbery, kind of the higher tier kinds of crimes. And that would get you labeled as a, quote, dangerous illegal alien. So if you are picked up on a different crime and they figure out you have a criminal record for these types of things, then you can get sentenced to a minimum of 5 years in prison if you're convicted of another violent crime. Not to mention that it's also a crime to transport undocumented, dangerous immigrants, quote unquote, into Idaho.
I just wanted to clarify really quickly. Does the bill specify that it's the, quote, smuggling or knowing and willfully transporting people with undocumented immigration status, or just particularly these, quote unquote, dangerous immigrants?
No, it is just those with the violent criminal record. So it would not apply to, simply giving a ride to an undocumented person to, go to their job in Idaho, transporting them, from the border or wherever they happen to be into Idaho, as long as they don't have that violent criminal record.
And both of these bills, specifically Representative Crane's bill, would redefine some of the role of law enforcement in the state and the role of the judiciary. Have law enforcement groups issued statements on that bill or, really weighed in on how they feel about that bill?
I haven't seen anything that law enforcement has put out on this. That doesn't mean that they won't come and testify when these bills presumably come up for public hearings. They're in pretty friendly committees, and I would imagine that this isn't the last we're going to hear of them.
And what kind of an atmosphere do you feel like these bills are creating in this state, kind of on top of the additional national narrative we have regarding immigration and mass deportations? What kind of an atmosphere is this creating in Idaho now?
Well, I think in the state house particularly, illegal immigration has been a topic of interest for a very long time now, with people on all sorts of sides of the issue. People, especially in the ag community, who don't like it, but they realize that it's necessary to have our dairy industry function, for example, right? With the different types of visas and work visas not really playing nicely with the dairy industry, just since, cows need to get milked year round. But the visa structure that we have right now is, you can only be in the US for so long to theoretically pick crops or do whatever for finite amounts of time. And so they want immigration reform done at the federal level. There are certainly a lot of lawmakers here who want no illegal immigration under any circumstances. They should immediately be deported. They are certainly loving this conversation and are glad that it's coming to the forefront. I do wonder, I haven't seen it necessarily now, but nationally, Democrats are becoming more hardliners on immigration. So I'm waiting to see if that's going to trickle down to Idaho as well.
And so there are two bills. There's the House bill regarding immigration and the Senate bill. How far along in the process are they, and what kind of steps could people take if they want to make their voices heard or reach out about their feelings regarding these bills?
Absolutely. People are going to have a good amount of time to do so. They were just introduced last week and could come up for public hearings in the House and Senate, respectively, sometime later this week at the earliest. And so you can reach out to the Senate State Affairs Committee or the House State Affairs Committee. Those are where those bills are going to be heard eventually. Both of those committees do take online testimony. So they're not currently scheduled for public hearings. But if you're super interested in this, definitely check those agendas, at least once or twice a day, preferably toward the end of the day, because that's when they update them the most.
For this next segment, there are different issues that end up coming up in the Idaho legislature every year that are unique and some frightening. There's a lot of words for all of these different issues. So I thought a way that we could discuss some of these other issues that maybe aren't going to be an entire segment on an episode was to play a variation of Date, Marry, Kill. I asked Jimmy to compile a list of 3 different issues, 3 different bills that have been brought up in the legislature recently, with the variation being, what one would I say it should get passed immediately, or I'll let it be passed immediately. Another one will leave up to the legislators, and one that I would kill immediately. It's gone. I'm sure this is going to be, we'll see. We'll see how this goes, because the Idaho legislators are a different bunch. So, okay, Jimmy, I want to hear what are my options with our Date, Marry, Kill?
Oh, man. Okay. So I've been rubbing my hands together all week, mostly just because I have a pretty decent understanding of where you usually sit on issues. And so
I'm not quiet about it.
Yeah, exactly. So I may have had a little too much fun, making you wring your hands and figure out which ones will fall into these particular categories for you. So, number 1, we had last week a couple bills banning pride flags in classrooms and on government property. You had Representative Heather Scott referring to pride flags as sex flags, for instance, on the House floor debate. And she's the sponsor of the one that would ban them on government property. Number 2, there's a House resolution saying that Dr. Anthony Fauci is not immune from being prosecuted in Idaho for his actions during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's despite receiving a pardon from former President Joe Biden for his tenure during the pandemic, which, as a former nurse, I'm sure you have feelings on. Then lastly, late last week, you had a new constitutional amendment from Representative Dale Hawkins. And this amendment, if passed, would bar the state from enforcing any sort of mandatory education laws, specifically around the ages at which kids have to go to school. So right now, kids ages 7 to 16 have to either go to a public school, a private school, or get some kind of homeschooling. And we should say that Idaho is like a huge bastion for the homeschooling community because there really aren't any regulations around them right now, aside from these age ranges. So, date, marry, kill. What do you think, Lindsay?
Oh, Jimmy, these feel like personal. Like, it's like, yeah, I feel like you picked like specific parts of like my personality and you were like, here you go.
I did. I actually did. And I'm sorry.
No, it makes it fun. It makes it fun for everybody. Before I jump in, this list makes me really happy that we are paying money. A portion of my paycheck every day is going to pay people to do these kind of bills. So, you know what? That feels cool. That feels fun. Feels like the system's working. Okay. Oh, I'm going to. Oh, okay.
I knew you might struggle.
I do. I am struggling. I'm coming up for justifications for my reasoning. Okay. I'm going to say that the Fauci one passes. And my reasoning behind that is Fauci does not care what some of these less educated legislators have to say about what he did during the pandemic. And I'm pretty sure a federal pardon supersedes anything happening at the state level. So we're going to let that one pass. That would be the one where I say it just automatically passes.
Okay.
I'm really struggling because that constitutional amendment, like it's giving the kids yearn for the mine energy. I feel like if we're taking away those age requirements for kids to be educated, definitely feel like we're going to get some child laborers soon.
Kids with their lunch pails and their pipes lining up to go down in the mines. Yeah.
Let's get them to the mines. Let's get them to the factories. You know, what they were wasting their time with social emotional learning at school anyway, right? Let's see. Ooh, okay. Okay, this is my reasoning. I have reasoning. I would leave the constitutional amendment to not have educational standards up to the legislature only because the constitutional amendments need a 2/3 majority approval from both the House and the Senate, and then they appear on the ballot. So I feel like if we leave that in the hands of the legislature, the odds of it passing are small. And I would kill the sex flags bill because it's just bigotry to be bigoted. And we don't need any more of that in this state. So the Fauci bill would pass. The constitutional amendment requiring, educational standards based on the ages of children, I would leave up to the legislature because I think it's slim that it would actually become a constitutional amendment. And I would kill the no pride flags bill. There we go. Final answer.
You have time now to breathe.
That was stressful. I think I took that too seriously. Okay, jumping back into it after what felt like a nail biter for me. Another major issue that has been making headlines that people are really talking about is the Idaho legislature has proposed several bills now to also change the ballot initiative process. And some of these proposed bills would change the process quite drastically. Can you explain some of the particulars and how they would change the law versus what we currently have in place for ballot initiatives?
Yeah, of course. So we have a couple different proposals. Again, kind of a House and Senate thing, though they're not really dueling. They'd complement each other. The quickest way to explain this for people who aren't familiar is ballot initiatives in Idaho. You have to meet a couple different criteria. Number one, you have to get a certain number of overall signatures, which is usually kind of in like the 60,000-ish signature range. And the second part that's more complicated is you have to get a certain amount of those signatures from within the boundaries of 18 of Idaho's 35 legislative districts. Blah. I know, it's really hard to kind of keep that all in your mind. So there's this proposed constitutional amendment that would require, instead of those 18 legislative districts, you would have to get those signatures in all 35 legislative districts. This might be deja vu for some people who've been paying attention to this for a while, because the legislature in 2021 passed this as a law, and it got ruled unconstitutional by the Idaho Supreme Court. Because essentially, let's say you get the number of signatures you need from 34 of the 35 legislative districts, but you don't get it from one. That means that, a tiny little county, they could essentially veto any sort of ballot initiative, which is what the Supreme Court kind of put in their opinion back then. So constitutional amendments need a 2/3 vote from the House and Senate before it would go to voters in 2026. The other one is from Representative Bruce Skog, and this would give any governor of Idaho veto power if an initiative doesn't pass by a 2/3 majority. So if this bill were to pass and become law, Idaho would actually be the first state in the country with an initiative process to allow a gubernatorial veto. No other state does. And so basically, this is the legislature giving yet another option to kind of counteract any sort of initiative, because they already can completely repeal or alter any initiative that passes.
And that's kind of, I'm curious your perspective if you want to give it, but I definitely feel like we have a pretty good threshold. Like we aren't getting everything that everybody possibly could think of on the ballot. It is a pretty steep process to get anything on the ballot as a ballot initiative. But then to be able to allow one person, the governor, to override the will of voters and essentially make voters pass a ballot initiative twice is, for a group that says that they're really interested in the will of the people, seems like sometimes not so much.
based on the reporting I've done, talking to political science professors, Idaho has, a pretty challenging but not insurmountable path to getting an initiative on the ballot. There's only like 30 some initiatives or referendums that have ever gone to the ballot, and not many of them actually pass. Just like we saw, with the open primary initiatives getting slapped down pretty hard with 70% of voters opposing it, which is something that, was brought up in the print hearing last week. Voters seemingly know what they want and what they don't want. And they were pretty emphatic about not wanting the open primaries initiative.
Yeah. And I wonder if people realize how much power the legislature actually has in combating these citizen-led initiatives. The Idahoans voted for legislature term limits, and that was completely removed by the Idaho legislature in 2002.
After surviving 3 different attempts to get it off the books,
absolutely. Too. Absolutely. And Representative Bruce Skog brought up, well, we have to get a bill passed through the House and through the Senate and signed by the governor. That is how the process works, Bruce. If we're going to talk about government closest to the people, or the will of the people, which sometimes I think is just a talking point during elections for a lot of legislators, that yes, I do. When you have a representative form of government, when you have these representatives, it should be a more involved process. Look at our Date, Marry, Kill segment. Yeah, I definitely want some oversight on that. But when it's the will of the voters, that is a big process. That is a big ask. And so I personally prefer a system where there are fewer checks on that. Clearly, it's what Idahoans want. And Idahoans, like you said, as we saw with the last ballot initiative, will be very clear in what they want or don't want.
And that's what we see in other states that do have those kinds of restrictions on, legislative action. So some states will say, oh, you can't touch this for 3 years, giving enough time for, lawmakers to cycle in and out during an election cycle, or you can only change it if you have, a 3/5 or a 2/3 majority to do it. So those ideas are certainly not unheard of, but I that would be very difficult to get past in the current legislative landscape in Idaho.
So, Jimmy, for anyone who has feelings or perspective or, is watching this closely, how far along in the process are these bills? And, how involved should people be planning on getting if they want to make their voices heard?
Again, like we said with the immigration bills, these are just at the beginning of the process. They were introduced last week. They still have to go through public hearings. So again, go look up who's on the House and Senate State Affairs Committees. That's where both of those bills are. Talk to your personal representatives or senators to maybe get their take and share your opinion with them. And again, just look out for those agendas to see when they might be coming up for public hearings so that you can testify remotely or in person and give your opinion one way or the other.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and breaking this down, and for those lightly stressful date, marry, kill options. That you did a good job. Those were tough. That was a struggle. So you really nailed that.
I'll try to maybe dial it down a little bit more for you next week, but no promises.
Well, I know. I like a challenge. So that's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend about us so they can stay up to date with everything going on at the Capitol too? We'll be back tomorrow morning with another look at whether In-N-Out is a win for the Treasure Valley. You won't want to miss it.